The observatory dome creaked as James Novick adjusted the massive telescope, his breath fogging in the cold mountain air. 3 years of self-imposed exile had worn grooves into his routine. Check the equipment, scan the designated sector, log the data. Repeat. The astronomy community had all but forgotten him after the scandal that ended his university career. Falsified data, they claimed. What they called delusion, he called discovery. Tonight, the stars seemed especially restless, pulsing with unusual energy that made his instruments fluctuate wildly. James rubbed his tired eyes, the stubble on his jaw rough against his palm. At 36, isolation had added premature lines to his face and a permanent furrow between his brows. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered to the cosmos, adjusting the frequency scanner. The answer came as a blazing light tearing across the sky, too controlled for a meteor, too fast for an aircraft. James scrambled for his camera, nearly knocking over his cold coffee as the object disappeared behind the northern ridge. The impact tremor came seconds later, subtle but unmistakable, rattling the windows of his small observatory. James grabbed his emergency pack and the old hunting rifle he kept for mountain lions. Whatever had crashed was less than 2 miles away, and no official response would reach this wilderness before dawn. Curiosity had always been his downfall. The hike through pine-scented darkness took 40 minutes, guided by a faint blue glow emanating from a clearing ahead. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached, rifle ready, heart thundering in his chest. What he found wasn't the satellite debris or experimental aircraft he'd expected. The vessel was unmistakably otherworldly, pearlescent material curved into impossible geometries, partially buried in scorched earth. A section had split open, revealing an interior that pulsed with soft light. "Hello," James called, immediately feeling foolish. "Is anyone hurt?" Movement from within the wreckage froze him in place. A figure emerged, stumbling on the uneven ground. James's flashlight beam caught her, unmistakably female despite her alienness, with skin the color of polished silver blue that seemed to capture and reflect moonlight. Her hair fell in platinum blonde waves to her shoulders, shimmering with an inner luminescence. Where human eyes would be, she had large, almond-shaped orbs of deep violet with no visible pupils. She spoke, her voice melodic but incomprehensible, before collapsing at the edge of the wreckage. James rushed forward, medical training overriding his shock. A viscous liquid, her blood, seeped from a wound across her torso, iridescent against her skin. "I'm going to help you," he said slowly, knowing she couldn't understand, but hopping his tone conveyed his intent. "You're safe." The alien woman's eyes fixed on him with startling intelligence before she lost consciousness. Making a split-second decision that would forever alter his life, James carefully lifted her. She was surprisingly light, almost weightless in his arms, her skin cool to the touch but unmistakably alive with a subtle pulse. As he carried her back toward the observatory, James couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had orchestrated this moment. That years of searching, the stars had somehow brought the stars to him instead. What he didn't yet know was that the woman in his arms carried secrets that would redefine everything he understood about connection, family, and the true nature of the cosmos. James converted his small study into a makeshift medical bay, laying the alien woman on his couch. Her wound had begun to seal itself, the edges knitting together with bioluminescent filaments. He'd never seen anything like it, a natural healing process that seemed almost magical by human standards. For 3 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, she would watch him with those haunting violet eyes, attempting communication through gestures and sounds that his human ears couldn't quite process. James began keeping a notebook, sketching symbols she drew in the air and attempting to match them with objects. On the 4th morning, James awoke to find her studying his astronomy charts with intense concentration. He'd named her Vela in his mind, after the constellation, though he hadn't shared this with her. "Good morning," he said, approaching slowly. She turned, placing a delicate 6-fingered hand on her chest. "Athara," she said clearly. James blinked in surprise. "Athara, is that your name?" She nodded, then pointed to him, head tilted in question. "James," he replied, touching his own chest. "James," she repeated, the sound slightly musical in her throat. That breakthrough began a flood of progress. Athara proved remarkably intelligent, grasping English vocabulary with astonishing speed. She learned through observation, often standing close enough that James could feel the subtle electrical field that seemed to emanate from her skin, a proximity that increasingly made his pulse quicken. By the second week, they had established enough communication for her to explain her mission. She was a cultural emissary from a star system she called Lyran, sent to establish first contact with promising worlds. Her ship had encountered an anomaly in Earth's atmosphere, causing the crash. "Others will come," she told him one evening as they sat before the fire, her silver-blue skin reflecting the flames in hypnotic patterns. "But not soon. Temporal displacement, difficult to explain in your language." James found himself increasingly captivated, not just by the scientific marvel she represented, but by Athara herself. The way she moved with fluid grace, her laughter like distant wind chimes when he made a cultural misstep, the thoughtful tilt of her head when considering a new concept. One night, as a snowstorm howled outside, they sat shoulder to shoulder reviewing star charts. James pointed to her home system. "What's it like there?" Athara's expression softened. She reached for his hand, hesitating just above his skin. "May I show you?" At his nod, she placed her cool palm against his. Immediately, his mind filled with images, crystal cities suspended between twin moons, oceans of luminous liquid, fields of plants that sang with the wind. The vision was so vivid he gasped. When it faded, he found Athara's face inches from his, her eyes searching his. "That was incredible," he whispered. Something shifted between them in that moment. Unable to help himself, James reached up to touch a strand of her starlight hair. Athara leaned into his touch, her skin warming slightly beneath his fingers. "Your people," she murmured, "do they often form bonds with those who are different?" "Some of us," James replied, his voice rough with emotion, "believe that the heart recognizes its own regardless of form." Athara smiled, a genuine human gesture she must have learned from him, and moved closer. "My people believe something similar." Their first kiss was hesitant, a crossing of boundaries both physical and cosmic. Her lips were cool at first, warming against his, the subtle electric current of her skin sending shivers down his spine. As they drew apart, James knew with absolute certainty that his solitary life among the stars had been leading him to this moment all along. What neither of them realized was that their connection had already set in motion events that would soon change everything. The dawn broke with unusual clarity after a night of shared warmth that had crossed the boundaries of their different worlds. James watched Athara sleeping beside him, her silver-blue skin luminous in the early light, her blonde hair spread across his pillow like spun starlight. The intimacy they discovered had transcended physical differences, a communion of souls that left him breathless with its intensity. Athara stirred, her violet eyes focusing on him with a depth that seemed to see through to his core. "There is something I must tell you, James," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that still enchanted him. "Something I have kept hidden." She sat up, the sheet falling away from her otherworldly form. "I did not come alone." James felt his heart stutter. "There are others." "My daughter," Athara said softly. "She travels in stasis within a protected chamber of my vessel, the safest place during diplomatic journeys. I feared telling you until I knew I could trust you with her existence." The revelation struck James like a physical blow. "You have a child. We need to get her immediately. The temperature drop at night could." "The chamber sustains her," Athara assured him, touching his face gently. "But yes, we must retrieve her today." They returned to the crash site under a steel-gray sky threatening snow. Athara moved with purpose through the wreckage to a sealed compartment James hadn't noticed before. She pressed her palm against a hidden panel, and it slid open with a whisper of escaping air. Inside lay what looked like a translucent cocoon, and within it, a small figure with the same silver-blue skin as Athara. The child appeared to be around 5 in human years, her features delicate, her eyes closed in peaceful suspension. Athara spoke words in her native tongue, and the cocoon dissolved. For a tense moment, the child remained motionless. Then her eyes, vibrant violet like her mother's, fluttered open. The little girl sat up, looking around in confusion before her gaze settled on James. Her expression transformed instantly into one of pure joy. She leapt from the chamber with surprising agility and ran directly to him, bypassing her mother completely. "Adder," she cried, embracing his legs with startling familiarity. "Adder Kavasara May." James looked to Athara in bewilderment, What is she saying? Athara's expression was one of shocked wonder. She called you father in our tongue. She recognizes you. That's impossible, James whispered, even as he instinctively knelt to the child's level. We've never met. The little girl touched his face with curious fingers, chattering excitedly in her language. Athara translated, her voice unsteady. She says she has dreamed of you many times. She calls you her father from the stars. My people, Athara explained as they walked back to the observatory, the child, Elora skipping ahead, can sometimes form connections across what you would call time and space. Elora has a particularly strong gift. She must have sensed you long before we ever arrived. James watched the little alien girl gathering pinecones with the delight of any child exploring a new world. She believes I'm her father. In some timeline, perhaps you are, Athara said quietly, or will be. That night, as a gentle snowfall blanketed the world outside, James watched Athara tucking Elora into the small bed they'd improvised. The child insisted he read her a story, though she couldn't understand the words. She fell asleep with her small hand clutched in his, her trust absolute. She has never connected with anyone like this, Athara whispered as they slipped from the room. Not even on our world. James pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. What does this mean for us? Athara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I don't know, but I believe the universe rarely makes mistakes in matters of the heart. As they held each other in the quiet darkness, neither noticed the distant lights of vehicles moving up the mountain road toward the observatory. The pounding on the door came at 3:17 a.m. James jolted awake, instinctively reaching for Athara beside him. Her skin had taken on a dull sheen, fear response he'd learned. Government vehicles, he whispered, peering through the curtains at the convoy of black SUVs surrounding his observatory. They must have tracked the crash. Athara was already moving, scooping up the still sleeping Elora. We cannot let them find us. My people's first contact protocols are explicit. No official interaction until cultural understanding is established. If your military captures us. They won't, James interrupted, pulling on clothes and grabbing his emergency backpack. There's a maintenance tunnel from the old mining days. It leads down the backside of the mountain. The tunnel was damp and claustrophobic, barely tall enough for James to stand upright. Elora had awakened, sensing the danger with preternatural awareness, remaining eerily silent as they navigated the darkness. Behind them, the sounds of the observatory being searched echoed distantly. They emerged into pre-dawn forest, 2 miles from where they'd started. James oriented himself using the stars, Athara's stars, and pointed west. My sister lives about 60 miles from here. We haven't spoken in years, but she'll help us. The journey took 2 days of careful travel, avoiding main roads and settlements. They stole moments of rest in abandoned hunting cabins and beneath the shelter of ancient pines. During these quiet interludes, Elora continued her peculiar bonding with James, teaching him words in her language while he taught her English. The child's ability to learn was extraordinary, another trait of her species, Athara explained. On the second night, huddled in the hollow of a massive fallen sequoia, James found Athara watching him with Elora asleep between them. The moonlight filtering through the forest canopy made her skin shimmer with an ethereal beauty that still took his breath away. Your sister, Athara said softly, will she accept us? James reached across Elora to take Athara's hand. Diana has always been the family rebel. After our parents died, she was the only one who defended my crazy theories about intelligent life beyond Earth. He smiled wryly. She's going to be insufferably smug about being right. Athara's laugh was like crystal bells in the darkness. She leaned across to kiss him, her touch sending that now familiar electric current through his body. What had begun as fascination had deepened into something neither of them had words for, not in English or in her melodic native tongue. Diana's isolated cabin appeared as promised at the forest's edge. His sister, hair now streaked with premature gray, opened the door with a shotgun in hand, her expression transforming from wariness to shock to tearful laughter in the span of seconds. You absolute idiot, she said, embracing James fiercely before stepping back to stare openly at Athara and Elora. You couldn't call first? Hey sis, bringing home an alien family, make up the guest room. Despite her irreverence, Diana proved an unexpected ally, converting her basement into a safe haven. As days stretched into weeks, They established a fragile normalcy. James and Diana reconnected over late-night whispers about their childhood, while Athara and Alora adapted to human customs with graceful curiosity. One evening, as they sat around Diana's kitchen table playing a board game that Alora was winning with suspicious ease, James realized they had become something he never expected, a family. Alora had taken to calling him "Adder Dad," a blend of her language and his. Athara's hand found his beneath the table, her touch saying everything words couldn't. Later that night, tangled in each other's arms, Athara confessed, "My people will come for us eventually. The temporal displacement means they might arrive tomorrow or years from now." Her violet eyes searched his. "What will you choose when that time comes?" Before James could answer, Diana burst into the room. "Government vehicles coming up the road. Someone talked. You have 10 minutes, maybe less." As they scrambled to gather essentials, James caught Athara's gaze. In that moment, he realized his choice had already been made, long before she'd ever asked the question. Dawn broke in shades of gold and crimson as James, Athara, and Alora crouched in the dense underbrush, watching government agents swarm Diana's cabin. They'd escaped through a hunting trail moments before the vehicles arrived, Diana staying behind to buy them time with a story about her eccentric brother who had visited briefly before heading to Canada. "We need to get back to my vessel," Athara whispered, her silver-blue skin muted to blend with the shadows. "If my calculations are correct, the temporal window approaches. My people will establish contact soon." James felt his heart constrict. After weeks of life on the run, the inevitable moment was upon them, the moment he would have to choose between his world and hers. They traveled by night, avoiding roads and settlements, guided by Athara's uncanny sense of direction. Alora had grown even more attached to James, often riding on his shoulders through difficult terrain, singing softly in her hybrid language of English and her native tongue. On the third night, as they made camp in a secluded valley, Alora fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the journey. James and Athara sat beside a small, sheltered fire, the flames painting her alien beauty in warm hues that made his chest ache with emotions he still struggled to name. "James," Athara began, her musical voice hushed, "there is something you must understand before we reach the vessel. If you choose to stay on Earth, Alora and I will carry the memory of you across the stars. But if you choose to come with us—" She paused, searching for words. "The adaptation process is irreversible. You would become part of our world completely." James reached for her hand, marveling at how natural it now felt to twine his 5 fingers with her 6. "You're asking if I'm afraid to leave humanity behind." "Yes," she said simply. He looked up at the star-strewn sky, the same stars he'd spent his life studying from a distance. "I've never quite belonged here, Athara, even before the scandal, before the isolation. I've always felt like I was waiting for something." His voice roughened with emotion. "Someone." The kiss they shared was deeper than any before, a promise written in the language of touch that transcended their biological differences. When they made love that night, beneath the canopy of stars, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. They reached the crash site at sunset the following day. The government had long since roped off the area, but the agents were gone, called to Diana's false lead hundreds of miles away. As they approached the damaged vessel, the air began to shimmer with points of light like earthbound stars. Alora gasped, clutching James's hand. "Kavasar, they come." The lights coalesced, forming a swirling portal of energy that pulsed with colors James had no human words to describe. Silhouettes appeared within the light, figures similar to Athara in form, moving with the same fluid grace. "The rescue party," Athara whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "They've found the temporal window." A figure stepped forward from the portal, addressing Athara in their flowing language. She responded, gesturing to James and Alora. The conversation continued for several minutes, incomprehensible to James yet clearly intense. Finally, Athara turned to him, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It's time to choose, James. They can take us home, all of us, if that is your wish." In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors cut through the mountain air. The government forces had realized their mistake and were returning. "What about Earth, my life here?" James asked, though he already knew the answer in his heart. "You once told me," Athara said, taking his face in her cool hands, "that you believed the heart recognizes its own regardless of form." She smiled, that human expression she'd learned from him. What does your heart recognize, James Novick? James looked down at Alora, who gazed up at him with absolute trust and love. He thought of his lonely observatory, of a world that had never quite accepted him, of nights spent searching the stars for answers. Then he looked at Athara, this woman from beyond those same stars who had crashed into his life and shown him wonders he'd only dreamed of. The helicopters grew louder as James took Athara's hand in his left and Alora's in his right. Together, they stepped toward the portal of light, leaving behind one world for the promise of another. As the light enveloped them, James felt not fear but a profound sense of rightness, as if his entire life had been a journey toward this very moment. The last thing he saw of Earth was the mountain observatory silhouetted against the setting sun, a solitary outpost that had served its purpose. He had spent his life looking up at the stars, and now, finally, the stars had welcomed him home.